Hello, my friend. On the pitch, the world knew him as a fierce, unpredictable warrior, a man who fought for every inch of grass with ferocious passion. But behind the fiery eyes and relentless drive of Luis Suarez lies a story that has very little to do with football and everything to do with love. Before the global fame and legendary nights in Europe, Suarez was just a 15-year-old boy in ragged clothes, sweeping trash off the dirty streets of Montevideo for loose change. He was angry, wild, and lost. But amidst the dust and decay, he met a young girl named Sofia who saw worth in him when no one else did. And when poverty threatened to tear them apart by an entire ocean, a wild promise was born. He would become a legend, just to buy a plane ticket back to her arms. Tonight, let us journey across the Atlantic into a story of raw devotion, survival, and redemption. Welcome back to VitaCast. In the coastal city of Salto, Uruguay, a restless boy named Luis Alberto Suarez Diaz entered a world where nothing came easy. When he was just 7 years old, his family packed their few belongings and moved to the country's capital, Montevideo, searching for a life that proved entirely elusive. The concrete jungle offered no soft landing. Instead, when Luis turned 9, his family shattered. His father walked out, leaving his mother, Sandra, alone in a cold, unforgiving city to raise 7 young boys on a maid's meager earnings. Poverty was not an abstract concept in the Suarez household. It was a daily physical ache. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than water and stale bread, and winter mornings where the cold seeped straight through the thin walls of their rented rooms. Shoes were a luxury Luis rarely enjoyed. When his soles wore down to nothing, he simply kept running barefoot across the sharp gravel and sun-baked asphalt, his bloodied toes leaving dark spots on the dust. To keep his family afloat, young Luis had to grow up far too fast. While other children were doing homework or playing with toys, 11-year-old Luis took to the dirty sidewalks of Montevideo with a heavy broom in his hands. He worked as a street sweeper, sweeping away fallen leaves, cigarette butts, and garbage, constantly scanning the ground for dropped coins. Every small coin he picked up from the filthy gutter went straight into his mother's hand to buy a bag of milk or a loaf of bread. Football was his only escape, but even the pitch offered little peace. Luis joined the youth ranks of Nacional, but his rebellious heart was drowning in bitterness. Angry at the world, angry at the father who abandoned him, he began sliding down a dangerous slope. He stayed out late on the rough street corners, hanging around bad influences, drinking alcohol, and skipping training sessions. Coaches grew tired of his erratic behavior and poor discipline. By the age of 14, the wild boy who swept streets for survival was on the verge of being thrown out of football altogether, spiraling toward a forgotten future in the dark alleys of Montevideo. In October 2002, when 15-year-old Luis was at his absolute lowest, a miracle quietly entered his life. Her name was Sofia Balbi. She was a 13-year-old girl with blonde hair, bright eyes, and a warm, compassionate heart. Unlike Luis, Sofia came from a comfortable, respectable middle-class family. On paper, they belonged to two completely different universes. Luis was an unkempt, rebellious street sweeper with dirty fingernails and torn clothes, while Sofia represented a world of order, dignity, and warmth that Luis had never known. Yet, when Sofia looked at Luis, she did not see a hopeless troublemaker or a filthy street worker. She saw a boy carrying an unbearable weight of pain, desperately searching for someone to believe in him. When Luis nervously approached her, she welcomed him with a gentle smile that shattered his guarded defenses. For the first time in his life, Luis felt seen, respected, and valued for who he truly was beneath his angry armor. Their early dates were simple, humble, and filled with deep emotion. Luis had no money to take her to fancy places. To buy her a hamburger or an ice cream, he would walk along the sidewalks sweeping garbage, diligently collecting dropped coins from the dirt until he had just enough pesos. When his pockets were empty, Sofia would give him her own pocket money, not out of pity, but out of love, ensuring he had bus fare to attend his football training sessions. Sofia became the anchor his stormy life desperately needed. She sat him down in her clean, quiet home and forced him to do his schoolwork, patiently helping him read and study. But most importantly, she gave him an ultimatum that changed his destiny. She looked into his eyes and told him that if he wanted a future together, he had to stop hanging out with bad influences on the streets, discipline himself, and devote his entire soul to football. She saw the hidden genius in his feet before anyone else in Uruguay did. For the first time, Luis had a reason to fight. Football was no longer just a game to escape his harsh reality. It became his sacred vehicle to become a man worthy of Sofia's love. Just as 16-year-old Luis was finally rebuilding his shattered life around Sofia's quiet warmth, a sudden tragedy tore his world apart. In 2003, a severe economic crisis swept across Uruguay, destroying businesses and leaving thousands hopeless. Sofia's father lost his bank job, forcing her family to make a heart-wrenching decision. They had to pack up their lives and move to Barcelona, Spain, nearly 10,000 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean. The news hit Luis like a physical blow to the chest. The only person who had ever truly believed in him, the girl who held his fragile heart, was being taken away to another continent. On the day of her departure, Luis accompanied Sofia to the airport. He stood in the crowded terminal, clutching her hands, his eyes flooded with tears. As a broke teenager who struggled to buy a loaf of bread, the cost of a flight to Europe felt as distant and impossible as reaching the moon. When Sofia walked through the boarding gates, Luis watched her silhouette disappear into the crowd. He collapsed onto a bench outside, sobbing hysterically into his rough hands, feeling completely helpless. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. He went back to his cold, empty streets, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness once again. Yet, instead of letting his grief push him back into the dark alleys of crime and despair, a wild, fierce fire ignited within his soul. The Atlantic Ocean was vast, but his devotion was deeper. He looked at the horizon and made a quiet, desperate oath. If he could not afford a ticket to Europe as a tourist, he would make European football come to him. He swore that he would play with such relentless fury that a European team would eventually buy him, paying for his ticket across the ocean so he could find Sofia again. From that day on, football became a matter of life and death. Every sprint, every goal, and every bruise at Nacional was dedicated to one goal: reaching Barcelona. Driven by an obsession that bordered on madness, young Luis fought his way into Nacional's first team. On the pitch, he did not play like a normal teenager. He played like a man possessed. Every tackle was a battle for his soul. Every sprint, a desperate attempt to close the distance between himself and Barcelona. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs cramped, knowing that somewhere, somehow, someone from Europe might be watching. In 2006, destiny finally took notice. Scouts from a modest Dutch club named Groningen flew all the way to Uruguay to evaluate a completely different player. But during the match, their eyes were stolen by a ferocious 19-year-old who chased every lost ball as if his life depended on it. Luis scored a stunning goal, but it was his raw, unstoppable hunger that captivated them. Without hesitation, Groningen offered 800,000 euros for the fiery forward. In the summer of 2006, Luis signed the contract. His impossible prayer had been answered. He was going to Europe. Arriving in the cold, quiet city of Groningen, Luis was initially lost. He spoke no Dutch, understood no English, and struggled to adapt to the freezing weather. But the physical discomfort meant nothing to him, because he was finally on the same continent as the girl he loved. The very moment he secured a short break and a few euros, he did not buy clothes or cars. He bought a ticket straight to Barcelona. Standing outside Sofia's door in Spain, his heart hammered against his ribs. When Sofia opened the door, years of painful separation, tearful late-night phone calls, and agonizing loneliness melted away in an instant. They held each other, weeping uncontrollably. Luis fell to his knees in front of her family, proving that he was no longer the hopeless street sweeper of Montevideo, but a man who had conquered an ocean just to keep his vow. Seeing the transcendent power of their love, Sofia's parents gave their blessing, 16-year-old Sofia packed her life into a suitcase and moved to the Netherlands to build a home with him. With his guardian angel finally back in his arms, the wild beast inside Luis found its peace, and his true greatness was ready to explode. With Sofia permanently by his side, Luis's career transformed into an unstoppable force. In 2009, the childhood sweethearts officially married, sealing a bond that had survived poverty, separation, and an entire ocean. Every time Luis took the pitch, he was no longer a wild street kid fighting out of desperation. He was a husband and a father, playing to make his family proud. His goal-scoring exploits at Ajax captured global attention, leading to a blockbuster move to Liverpool, where he established himself as one of the most lethal strikers in football history. Yet, his heart's compass remained pointing toward the Mediterranean coast. In the summer of 2014, the ultimate circle was completed. FC Barcelona signed Luis Suarez for a record fee. 11 years after standing broken at the airport in Montevideo, watching the love of his life fly away to Barcelona, Luis arrived in the very same city, not as a helpless spectator, but as one of the most expensive and celebrated footballers on earth. The promise made by a broke teenager sweeping dirt on the sidewalks of Uruguay was finally kept in full. At Barcelona, Suarez reached the absolute pinnacle of world football, winning the historic treble, the UEFA Champions League, La Liga, and the Copa del Rey, while capturing the European Golden Shoe against prime Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. But despite all the trophies, his most iconic moment remained his goal celebration. After every single goal, Luis would kiss his wrist and 3 fingers, a loving tribute to his wife, Sofia, and their 3 children, Delfina, Benjamin, and Lautaro. While the media often focused on his fiery temper and on-pitch controversies, those who knew Luis understood that his aggressive instinct was just the raw survival mechanism of a boy from the slums. But off the pitch, Sofia's love had completely redeemed him. She turned a rebellious, forgotten street worker into a devoted family man and a living legend. The boy who swept trash for bread had conquered the world, all because he fell in love with a girl who believed in him when he had nothing. My friend, Luis Suarez's story reminds us that true love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone who makes you want to conquer the impossible. A heart driven by devotion can move mountains, cross oceans, and turn a forgotten street sweeper into an immortal legend. If you feel lost tonight, or if the distance between where you are and where you want to be feels like an uncrossable ocean, don't lose hope. Keep running, keep fighting, and hold tightly to the love that lights your path through the darkness. Thank you for joining me tonight on VitaCast. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of love today. Until next time, no matter what happens, take care of yourself.